The town of Hollow's End was quiet, smothered beneath a pale moon. Every home seemed to shrink from the silence. A farmhouse loomed on the edge of the crooked fields, windows shattered, wood sagging, its walls aching with age. Laura said, "It feels like the walls are breathing." The chill crept through her coat, gnawing her bones. James whispered, "No wind, no animals, something's wrong." Their son Ethan clung to her arm, his small fingers trembling. From the darkness inside, a scream ripped out, raw, wet, and broken. Shadows shifted along the rotting doorway as if alive. Laura's breath caught, her heart clawing at her chest. James muttered, "We shouldn't be here." The echo of the scream sank into the earth, leaving behind silence thicker than air. A slow dragging sound began, wood groaning under weight, pulling closer, closer. The metallic scent of blood seeped into their nostrils. Then, beneath the fractured frame of the doorway, a whisper slithered out, slow and deliberate. It called Laura's name. The silence after the whisper pressed against their ears. Laura swallowed hard, her chest tight, her name still echoing in her skull. James said, "No one knows we're here." Ethan tugged her sleeve, his small voice trembling. "Mom, I want to go home." The night felt wrong, time dragging slower than it should. The town clock chimed once, then again and again, until it struck 13 dial. Each toll was heavy, distorted, stretching too long, shaking the glass in the farmhouse windows. Laura gasped, 13. It's real." James stumbled back, his face pale. Shadows spilled across the floor, not cast by light, but moving on their own, creeping toward them. Ethan cried softly, pressing his face against Laura. Every creak of wood felt like the house breathing, as if it was alive and aware of them. James clenched his jaw, forcing bravado. "It's just the old boards." Yet his hands shook, betraying his fear. Outside, the wind died, but the shadows kept moving. The 13th chime lingered, twisting in the night air. Laura whispered, "This isn't possible." James said, "We're leaving." But when he yanked the door, it resisted, the handle icy, unmoving. Ethan sobbed, "Please, Dad, open it." James pulled harder, his knuckles white, but the door refused. The farmhouse groaned deep, like something buried beneath the floorboards stirred. The shadows bled longer across the walls, stretching fingers toward them. Laura's breath quivered, her eyes darting to the window. Glass rattled, fog pressing against the panes as if trying to seep inside. James turned, panic rising in his voice. "It's sealing us in." Ethan buried his face in Laura's coat. The whisper returned, harsher, dragging her name again, as though the darkness itself had lungs. Laura felt her knees weaken, the farmhouse pressing down like a tomb. She said, "It knows us." James snarled, "Don't say that." Yet fear cracked his voice. The boards beneath them rattled, dust rising from the seams. Ethan screamed as a low thud sounded beneath the floor, rhythmic and heavy, dragging closer. The metallic scent sharpened, stinging their throats. Laura's eyes watered and she whispered, "Blood." James pressed his ear to the floor, his face blanching as a sound rose up. A slow dragging chain, scraping wood, moving directly beneath them. The farmhouse quaked with the weight of something unseen. The dragging chain thundered beneath the boards, rattling the walls. Laura cried, "We need to leave." James pulled her arm, his voice breaking. "The door won't move." Ethan's sobs rose, echoing the trembling floor. Then the boards beneath James buckled. A crack split the wood, and from the dark gap a pale hand clawed upward, nails sharp, skin stretched thin over bone. Laura screamed, pulling Ethan back. James stumbled, heart hammering. The hand twitched, grasping at the air, reaching for them. The whisper grew louder, overlapping itself, calling Laura's name again and again. The farmhouse groaned as if opening its lungs. The floorboards quaked beneath the pale hand clawing upward. Laura pulled Ethan close, whispering prayers under her breath, though her voice shook. James slammed his boot against the rising hand, splintering wood. A shriek rose from below, not human, but stretched and broken. The shadows recoiled, writhing across the walls, retreating into corners. Ethan cried, "Make it stop!" Laura pressed his face into her shoulder, whispering comfort she did not feel. James' chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple. The 13th toll of the town clock finally faded, leaving silence like a grave. But the silence was not empty. It pulsed with something waiting, listening. The whisper returned, softer now, slipping into their ears, repeating Laura's name like a curse. James growled, "It wants you." His words froze the air, and Laura felt the world collapse inward as the farmhouse seemed to breathe in time with her trembling heart. The farmhouse exhaled dust, as if it resented their presence. Laura staggered backward, clutching Ethan as the whisper slithered along the ceiling. James scanned the dark corners with his flashlight, but the beam fractured, scattering into nothing. Ethan whimpered, "It's in the walls." Laura felt the weight of the words crush her chest. The floor creaked under invisible steps, pacing, circling. James barked, "Show yourself." His voice cracked, defiant yet hollow. The farmhouse groaned in answer, and then came the sound, slow scratching along the windows, as though claws etched into the glass. Laura's eyes darted toward the window where faint outlines moved in the fog, shapes with no faces. Ethan whimpered louder, trembling. James's jaw tightened, but his hands shook uncontrollably. The sound grew louder, scratching faster, the glass bending inward. Laura whispered, "It's trying to get in." The glass bulged inward with a deep groan. James pulled Laura and Ethan back, his body shielding them. A crack spidered across the pane, then stilled. Silence again, but heavier now. Laura said, "It's toying with us." James clenched his teeth, but her words struck him like truth. Ethan sobbed quietly, his breath fogging the air. The silence broke as every clock in town began to chime again, 13 strikes pounding the night. The sound rattled the farmhouse, shaking plaster loose from the walls. Laura screamed over the noise, "Why 13?" James shouted, "It means midnight never ends here." The 13th chime dragged on, distorting, bending into screams that were not theirs. Shadows elongated, their forms stretching into grotesque figures across the walls, twitching with hunger. Ethan cried out, burying his face against Laura's chest. The final chime ended in a hollow echo. Laura whispered, "It won't let us leave." James wiped his face, voice trembling. "There has to be a way out." But the farmhouse pulsed, groaning, its walls bending inward like lungs filling with air. The boards beneath their feet warped, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Ethan cried, "It's alive." Laura's eyes locked onto the fireplace where ashes stirred on their own, sparks glowing red. James pulled them away, but the flames ignited suddenly, burning with black smoke instead of firelight. Within the flames, faces appeared, twisted and screaming, mouths open in eternal agony. Laura gasped, stumbling back. James shouted, "Don't look at it," but Ethan's wide eyes stayed fixed, tears spilling. The screaming faces inside the fire howled louder, until the walls quivered with their torment. The faces inside the fire twisted, mouths stretching unnaturally. Laura turned Ethan's head away, whispering desperately, "Don't look." James grabbed a chair, slamming it against the window, but the glass did not break. The sound of claws returned, scraping along the outer walls, circling the farmhouse like predators. Ethan clung tighter, sobbing into Laura's chest. Suddenly, the fireplace roared, spitting out ash that twisted midair into shadowy forms. One shape lunged, dragging across the floor, a figure without eyes but with teeth too sharp, gnashing. Laura screamed as James swung the broken chair leg, striking it. But the shadow only split and reformed. The whisper returned, louder now, layered with many voices, repeating Laura's name again and again until the sound rattled inside her skull. She cried, "Why me?" The walls shook violently, and the shadows laughed. The fire roared with black smoke, swallowing its own light. Laura shielded Ethan's eyes as his small body shook in her arms. James swung the broken chair leg wildly, shouting, "Stay back!" But the shadows only twisted closer, reforming with every strike. Then the front door rattled violently as though forced open from outside. Laura gasped, stepping back toward the far wall. James raised the flashlight, its beam flickering before landing on a figure at the threshold. A man stood framed by the moonlight, tall and thin, his coat soaked from rain. His face was half hidden beneath a hood. The stranger's voice was hoarse but steady. "You should not have come here." James snapped, "Who the hell are you?" The stranger stepped forward, mud dripping from his boots, and shadows seemed to retreat from his presence. Laura whispered, "Why are they afraid of you?" The man's eyes glimmered, hollow with secrets, as he replied, "Because I know what waits in this house." The stranger's boots echoed on the warped floorboards as he stepped inside. The shadows hissed and recoiled, melting against the walls. James glared, keeping the chair leg ready. Laura's voice trembled. "Do you know what this place is?" The stranger paused, his pale face flickering in the dim firelight. He said, "This town was cursed decades ago when the clocks were broken." His words seemed to weigh down the room. Ethan whispered, "Clocks?" The stranger nodded slowly, his eyes distant. Every clock was meant to seal what walks in the dark, but they were tampered with, and now they strike 13 to keep the door open. Laura's breath caught as she realized the 13th chime was not a mistake but a key. James scoffed, though his fear betrayed him. "That's insane." The stranger's tone hardened. "You heard it, didn't you? 13. It's not madness. It's a warning." The stranger crouched near the cracked floor where the pale hand had emerged. He brushed the boards with gloved fingers, muttering words that made Laura's skin crawl. Ethan pressed closer to her, whispering, "I don't like him." James said, "Neither do I." The stranger looked up sharply, eyes hollow. "You don't have to like me. You just have to survive." He stood, pulling something from his coat, a rusted pocket watch. He opened it, and the ticking was unnaturally loud. Laura whispered, "Why carry that here?" The stranger replied, "Because this one still obeys the right hour." James narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "And what does that mean?" The stranger's lips twisted grimly. "It means when the others strike 13. This one doesn't. This one tells the truth, and the truth is what hunts you." Laura's heart hammered as the watch ticked louder, drowning out the silence. The stranger snapped the watch shut, and the room seemed to breathe again. He turned toward the fire where the screaming faces had dulled into ash. Laura said, "Why is it calling my name?" The stranger's eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. He said, "Because it remembers you." Laura shook her head, voice breaking. "I've never been here before." The stranger stepped closer, his voice low. "Not in this life." James growled, "Enough riddles." He raised the chair leg again, but his hand shook. Ethan whimpered softly, hiding his face. The stranger ignored James, staring only at Laura. His voice was calm but heavy with doom. "The shadows want you because you belong to them." Laura staggered back, shaking her head. No. The farmhouse groaned loudly, boards snapping as if to agree with the stranger's claim. The farmhouse trembled as if alive, shadows crawling along every seam of the walls. Ethan cried into Laura's chest, "Make it stop." James shouted, "Tell us what to do." The stranger did not move at first, his face unreadable. Finally he spoke, "There is no stopping it. There is only surviving the night." Laura's voice cracked. "What happens when the clocks strike 13 again?" The stranger's expression hardened. "Then the door fully opens." James paled, his knuckles white around the chair leg. "And what comes through?" The stranger's eyes darkened as he whispered, "The thing that feeds on names, Wa." The air thickened as the words sank in. Laura held Ethan tighter, tears sliding down her cheeks. The house groaned, the walls splitting slightly, as if preparing to give birth to something unspeakable. The sound of distant chimes began again, faint but building. The farmhouse rattled with the sound of splitting beams, as if the walls carried secrets too heavy to hold. Laura clutched Ethan tighter, whispering his name to soothe his sobs. James paced, sweat shining on his forehead, his grip on the broken chair leg unsteady. He said, "We can't trust him." His eyes darted toward the stranger, who stood unmoving, his hood shadowing most of his face. Laura shook her head, her voice trembling. "He knows more than we do." The stranger's lips curved slightly, almost a smile as he murmured, "At least one of you listens." James growled, his suspicion boiling over. "Why are you here? Why now?" The stranger's answer was sharp, because betrayal already opened the door once, and it waits for another to do the same. Laura stiffened, her heart pounding while Ethan whimpered, "What does he mean?" The farmhouse moaned as shadows thickened, and James' glare burned with mistrust. The stranger stepped forward, boots scraping the warped floor, and the shadows retreated like water from fire. James barked, "Stay back," and raised the chair leg, his face pale with fury. Laura whispered, "Stop this, James." But his eyes flared with something more than fear, suspicion that cut deeper than reason. James said, "He brought it here. Look how the shadows fear him." The stranger's eyes hardened, his voice low and cold. "They don't fear me. They fear what I know." Laura's knees buckled as Ethan clung to her. The farmhouse shook with another groan, dust raining from the ceiling. The stranger added, "One of you will betray the others tonight. That's how the curse survives." Laura gasped, whispering, "No." James' hands trembled and his anger turned toward Laura. He snarled, "How do we know it isn't you?" The whisper returned, crawling across the walls, repeating her name again. The air thickened, charged with mistrust and fear. Laura rose to her feet, shaking, her arms still wrapped around Ethan. She said, "This isn't me. I don't know this place." James's jaw clenched, his eyes wild as he shouted, "It's your name it wants. It keeps calling you." Laura flinched, her voice breaking, "I didn't choose this." The stranger's voice cut through the storm, calm and sharp. "It doesn't matter if you chose it. It chose you." Ethan cried louder, tears streaking his face, "Don't fight." James lowered his chair leg, his chest heaving, but the suspicion lingered in his stare. Laura's eyes filled with despair, and she whispered, "James, please." The farmhouse groaned again, louder now, as if mocking them. The whisper twisted into laughter, filling every corner. James' hands shook as he looked at his wife with fear, unsure if she was his ally or the curse's vessel. Laura stumbled backward, pressing against the cracked wall, Ethan hiding his face against her. James' breathing came in ragged bursts, fury clouding reason. He hissed, "You knew something, didn't you? You felt this before." Laura shook her head violently, tears streaking her cheeks. "Never." The stranger's hollow eyes turned toward her, his words chilling, "Memories don't always belong to this life." James cursed, slamming the chair leg against the floor so hard it splintered further. Ethan cried out, "Stop it." Laura cried, "James, please, it's me." His shoulders sagged, torn between love and dread, while the stranger's voice pressed on, "Fear feeds it, betrayal births it." Shadows gathered at the windows, their faces pressing against the glass without eyes, watching. The farmhouse shook with laughter not their own. James whispered, almost broken, "If it's you, I'll have to." His words died, leaving Laura trembling, Ethan clutching tighter. The laughter outside grew until it shook the beams. Laura whispered, "We're tearing ourselves apart, and that's what it wants." James fell to his knees, the chair legs slipping from his hands. He covered his face, his body trembling, whispering her name. Laura crouched, placing a hand on his shoulder, her own fear burning into desperate tenderness. The stranger watched, his face carved from stone. He said, "The curse survives through betrayal. Do not give it what it craves." James' voice cracked. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Ethan crawled between them, his small hands pressing against both his parents, crying, "We have to stay together." Laura wrapped her arms around Ethan, pulling James close despite his resistance. For a fleeting moment, silence returned, but it was not peace. The farmhouse creaked, and the whisper returned, not with Laura's name, but James, slow and deliberate. His face drained of blood. The farmhouse shook again, and the laughter of shadows twisted through the cracks. Suddenly, the front door burst open, slamming against the wall. Laura screamed, shielding Ethan with her arms. James stumbled to his feet, raising the broken chair leg. "File?" A figure staggered inside, limping, covered in dirt and dried blood. His clothes were torn, his face hollow with exhaustion. He collapsed against the wall, gasping. Laura whispered, "Who is that?" The stranger's voice was steady, "The survivor." The man coughed, his voice raw, "You're trapped, just like I was." James demanded, "Trapped by what?" The survivor's eyes widened with terror, the thing that comes when the clocks strike 13. Ethan whimpered, pressing his face into Laura's chest. The survivor's trembling hand pointed toward the cracked floorboards. He whispered, "I've seen it. I've seen what it does." The farmhouse groaned again, as though agreeing with his words. The survivor tried to stand but fell to his knees, his hands shaking. Laura rushed forward, helping him sit upright. James warned, "Don't get too close." Laura shot him a desperate look. The survivor rasped, "I was here once, years ago. The clock struck 13, and I ran, but I didn't escape. I've been running ever since." His eyes glistened with pain, as if haunted by every second. The mysterious stranger crouched low, watching with grim interest. He said, "You should not have returned." The survivor spat blood, his voice rising. "I didn't return. It followed me. It always follows." Ethan cried, "Please make it stop." Laura held him tight, whispering soothing words she barely believed. The farmhouse groaned again, and the survivor's eyes widened in panic. He whispered, "The shadows feed on fear. They'll eat us alive if we give in." The survivor's voice dropped lower, each word quivering. He said, "This town was cursed after a ritual went wrong. The clocks were bound to keep it asleep." Laura shuddered, whispering, "What ritual?" The survivor's eyes flickered toward the stranger, and silence thickened. James noticed the pause, his jaw tightening. "Tell us." The survivor coughed, trembling. "A sheriff tried to end it. Failed. The town bled for it. The shadows never left." Ethan's eyes widened, his small voice asking, "The sheriff?" The stranger's face darkened as he said, "The fallen authority. He knew too much and paid the price." Laura trembled, realizing their fates mirrored those before them. James muttered, "History repeating itself." The farmhouse shivered as the 13th toll echoed faintly again in the distance, chilling their bones. A loud crash echoed from outside as if heavy boots stomped across the earth. The survivor flinched violently, pressing against the wall. Laura whispered, "What is it?" The stranger's eyes narrowed. "The fallen authority." The door creaked again, and in the doorway stood a figure once noble, now broken. A sheriff with tattered uniform and empty bottle dangling from his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his face twisted in sorrow. James muttered, "He's drunk." The sheriff's voice was bitter, slurred. "I tried to stop it. I failed. Now it owns me." He staggered forward, the bottle shattering on the floor. Laura pressed Ethan against her chest. The shadows seemed to embrace the sheriff, as though feeding on his despair. He groaned, "The town is already dead. You're just too stubborn to see it." The farmhouse trembled violently, dust pouring down. The sheriff stumbled forward, his voice cracking as he shouted, "It takes what it wants, names, lives, hope. You can't fight it." James shouted back, "Then why are you still alive?" The sheriff's lips twisted into a broken smile, "Because I gave it what it asked for." Laura's stomach churned, dread creeping through her bones. Ethan whispered, "What did he give?" The sheriff's gaze shifted, landing on Laura with hollow eyes. "A name," he said. Laura froze, her pulse racing. The shadows twisted violently around the farmhouse, screeching. James shouted. "Whose name?" The sheriff staggered, his mouth curling into a grin. He rasped, "Laura's." Ethan screamed, clutching his mother. The farmhouse shook violently as if confirming the cursed bond, the 13th toll thundering in their ears once more. The farmhouse quivered as the 13th toll began again, this time louder than before. Laura clutched Ethan as the sound pounded against her skull. James pressed his hands to his ears, shouting, "It's splitting my head open." The survivor screamed, "It's coming!" The sheriff staggered forward, his face twisted with terror and guilt, clutching his chest. The mysterious stranger's voice rose above the chaos. "The clocks bleed time. It means the door is no longer sealed." The walls rippled, the wood stretching as if it were flesh, blood dripping down from the beams like rain. Laura cried, "The house is alive!" Ethan buried his face in her chest, sobbing. James stumbled to the window and froze as the town clock tower outside melted, its hands spinning uncontrollably, crimson liquid dripping down the stone. The survivor whispered, "Time is dying." The 13th toll bent into an inhuman wail, shaking the world itself. The floorboards split wide open, gushing streams of black liquid that reeked of rust and death. Laura dragged Ethan back as the foul tide spread across the room. James shouted, "It's flooding us!" The survivor struggled to his feet, yelling, "Don't let it touch you!" The sheriff laughed bitterly, collapsing into the spreading blackness, his body writhing as shadows coiled around him like serpents. Laura screamed, "Help him!" But the stranger's voice was cold. He gave himself long ago. The sheriff's body dissolved, leaving only his uniform drifting on the black tide. Ethan shrieked and clung to Laura as she stumbled backward. James gritted his teeth, gripping her arm, forcing her away from the spreading liquid. The survivor's voice cracked. "It's the creature's breath. It comes before it feeds." The farmhouse shuddered violently, as if something massive moved beneath it, waiting to rise. The black liquid surged higher, writhing like living veins across the boards. Laura lifted Ethan into her arms, her strength fueled by terror. James snarled, "We can't stay here." The stranger pointed toward the staircase, his voice like iron, "Upstairs. Now." The survivor limped forward, groaning with pain. They raced up the steps as the house groaned with fury. Shadows clawed up the walls, grasping for them, their formless mouths whispering names. Laura stumbled, but James caught her, forcing her up. Ethan screamed, "They're touching me!" Laura pressed his face against her shoulder. The stranger climbed behind them, his rusted pocket watch glowing faintly in his hand. The survivor wheezed, "It's chasing us!" Suddenly, the stairs warped, twisting into grotesque shapes. The shadows laughed in 1,000 voices. Laura felt her legs weaken as the 13th toll echoed again. They reached the upper landing, panting as the walls quivered like living flesh. Laura pressed Ethan against her chest, whispering, "Stay with me." James looked back as the black tide surged up the stairs, dragging broken furniture into its current. The survivor collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. The stranger stood still, staring at the warped hallway ahead, his voice heavy. "This is where it reveals itself." Laura shook her head, whispering, "No more." The floor cracked beneath their feet, and blood seeped through the gaps. Ethan whimpered, covering his ears, as a scream rose from the hallway. A sound not from one mouth, but hundreds, layered and endless. James clenched his fists, his voice breaking. "What is that?" The stranger whispered, "The creature." The air thickened, impossible to breathe, as a shadow larger than the house itself shifted beyond the hallway. The hallway pulsed as the 13th toll thundered again, shaking the air like a heartbeat. Laura whispered, "Please let it end." Ethan buried his face in her neck, trembling. James took a step forward, anger breaking through his fear, shouting, "Show yourself." The black liquid surged past the staircase, coating the walls, dripping like veins. The survivor screamed, "Don't call it!" But it was too late. From the end of the hallway, the shadows merged into a towering form, its body made of writhing limbs, its head a void with endless teeth. The creature's breath rattled the walls, cold and foul. Laura sobbed. "God help us." The stranger raised his glowing pocket watch, his voice steady. "Time is the only weapon left." The creature's teeth stretched into a grin, and the house itself seemed to lean toward them. The 13th toll shattered into silence. The creature towered at the end of the hallway, its teeth clicking like knives in an endless grin. Laura clutched Ethan close, whispering promises she could not keep. James shouted, "We end this tonight." The survivor gasped, "You can't kill it." The mysterious stranger raised the glowing pocket watch high, his voice booming, "Time itself binds it." The creature's shadow limbs writhed, stretching toward them, scraping across the ceiling with shrieks, like metal tearing. The walls bulged inward, dripping blood, the house straining under the weight of its presence. Ethan sobbed, "It's too big." Laura's tears streaked down her face as she said, "We have to fight." James stepped forward, broken chair leg raised, trembling but defiant. The survivor whimpered, "It only takes names. Don't let it take yours." The 13th toll began again, pounding, shaking every bone in their bodies. The creature lunged, its maw splitting wider, swallowing the light. James swung the chair leg, striking its shadow flesh, but the wood snapped in his hands. He fell back, gasping. Laura screamed, pulling Ethan behind her. The stranger shouted, "Only the watch can hold it." He opened the pocket watch, its ticking erupting into deafening chimes. The creature recoiled, its form twisting violently, teeth snapping in rage. Ethan cried, "It's working." The survivors stumbled forward, shouting, "Hold it longer!" But the watch's glow dimmed, cracks forming across its glass face. Laura shouted, "It won't last!" The creature shrieked, shadows clawing across the ceiling, plaster raining down. James grabbed Laura's arm, yelling, "We'll all die here if we don't finish it now." The air filled with a stench of rotting time, every second stretching longer, suffocating. The watch cracked fully, its light sputtering. The creature roared, shadows surging like a tidal wave. Laura shielded Ethan, screaming his name. James pushed against the floor, standing in defiance, his voice raw. "Take me, not them." Laura cried, "No." The survivor's eyes widened in horror, shouting, "Don't give it your name." But the creature laughed in 1,000 voices, reaching for James. The stranger's voice boomed, "Time can only bind it with sacrifice." James turned to Laura, his eyes soft through the terror. He whispered, "Save him," and looked at Ethan. Laura's scream ripped the air, shaking the walls. The watch glowed faintly one last time as James stepped forward, the creature's shadow swallowing him whole. The 13th toll shattered into silence, and the house trembled, every wall groaning as if mourning. James' scream echoed as the creature pulled him into its void. Laura lunged forward but was yanked back by the stranger, his grip iron. She cried, "No, give him back!" Ethan sobbed uncontrollably, reaching for his father. The creature's teeth clicked shut, leaving only silence. The pocket watch shattered in the stranger's hand, shards scattering across the floor. The survivor whispered, "It's sealed again, for now." Laura collapsed, clutching Ethan, rocking him as tears poured down her face. The house stopped trembling, its walls sagging back into stillness. The shadows melted, dripping away into cracks. The survivor leaned against the wall, whispering prayers under his breath. The stranger's eyes fixed on Laura, cold and steady. He gave his name. That binds it, but the curse never ends. Laura lifted her face, fury and grief burning in her eyes. Then it will come for Ethan. The stranger said nothing. The farmhouse fell into silence, broken only by Ethan's soft sobs. Laura held him tightly, whispering his name again and again. The survivor whispered, "It always takes someone. It always comes back." The stranger turned toward the doorway, his voice flat. "The clocks will strike 13 again. This is only borrowed time." Laura's tear-streaked face hardened as she whispered, "Then it isn't over." Ethan lifted his face, his small voice trembling. "Will it take me too?" Laura kissed his head, whispering, "Not while I breathe." The house groaned one last time, the boards tightening. Then, in the silence, a faint chime rang out in the distance. 1, 2, 3, until 13 dial. The sound lingered, sharp and mocking. Laura's eyes widened as she held Ethan close, the realization sinking deep. The nightmare had not ended. It had only begun again.